Okay, namaste everybody, and welcome. And we are joined, we have Achala ji back with us, and we are continuing with the series that we started on all the Navgrahas. We are going to learn more about healing Ketu in our chart. So let us hear it from her. So over to you, Achala ji. Namaste and welcome once more. And so take it over from here. So what do you want to share about Ketu today?
Namaste, Dr. Paiji. It's lovely to be here again. Let me just share my presentation first. It's actually a really special time that we are talking about Ketu right now, as Moon is so close to Ketu at the moment, and also we are right now also experiencing the eclipse with full moon being very near Ketu. So it's a very, very special timing. I find it somehow very, very fascinating that our last episode was on Rahu, and that was also the eclipse time. Now I thought that Ketu is definitely the best choice when we are facing another eclipse. Ketu, for me personally, it's a truly fascinating planet and a truly beautiful planet as well, as I believe it is for any spiritual seeker, because it's a very mysterious planet. Far less obvious note of the moon, I would say, than Rahu himself. It's far easier for us to define Rahu. It's far easier for us to also identify ourselves with Rahu and Rahu's tendencies, because they are much closer to our human nature. Things like desires, compulsions, obsessions, the need to grow and evolve is very natural for every single one of us. But when we talk about Ketu, it's far more mysterious. Even if we look at the scriptures, what they say about the grahas, for example, such a really simple thing, we can see that every single graha has a particular color assigned to it. It's particular color, particular vibration. But then when we go to the description of Ketu, Ketu is often defined as being multicolored, as having many qualities that are kind of mixed together and a little hard to define, which is why very often Ketu in our personal birth chart represents those things which are actually unknown, which are a mystery. And I personally believe that this is the reason why most people struggle with Ketu, truly, because we always have this need in our mind, which comes from the Rahu himself, to understand everything with the mind, to define it, to put it in a box, to label it. But then when we look at Ketu, he represents all those things which we actually don't understand, which are beyond our comprehension. And because of that, when we do not understand certain things about our life, it's kind of very natural that some form of dissatisfaction can arise. Because when we are dissatisfied, it's very often because we know that something is missing, but we may not necessarily know what exactly is that. And this is where many people struggle with Ketu, truly. But at the same time, the paradoxical thing about Ketu is that even though he sometimes may confuse our minds, that even though he can sometimes be very elusive in a way, especially he can very easily escape this rational mind of ours. But at the same time, when we are more in tune with this energy, it's so much easier to receive the inner guidance, which is why Ketu is also one of the main significators in the birth chart of this feeling of intuition inside of us, the inner guide inside of us, who helps always to find a way through feeling alone, which is why, of course, Rahu here as a contrast is symbolized as this head without body, which constantly thinks, but it's not very grounded. While Ketu is very opposite, it's a body without head, with heart, right? That's the thing. There is this feeling inside. There is something that guides us beyond understanding. And Ketu often makes situations in life that make us face this fact that there are plenty of things out there which are beyond our understanding, and maybe they're supposed to be as well. Of course, Ketu is somehow understood in many ways because he tends to give losses in our life, or something we define as loss. Due to that, he's also called the giver of detachment. which is a beautiful quality. And yet very often, at least in my personal experience, when people come for readings, when they see there is Ketu seated in the house, there's always fear. I must say Saturn does not awaken so much fear to that, because there is always this feeling of ending, of impending death, or, right? That something must end out there, which I understand, because of course Ketu is such a weird planet, body without head. He's beheaded literally. He's in some scriptures also defined to be the son of Mrityu, or goddess of death herself. So of course, he brings endings into our lives. He causes certain losses to happen. But as my Gurudev, Paramahansa Vishwananda, often says, that the biggest mistake we all do, not just on spiritual path, but even in daily life, is whenever we lose something ends, we focus only on what we lose, but we do not focus and we do not appreciate what we get. Because for certain, Ketu never takes away without giving something else in return. And I think that as we go farther in this presentation, it becomes more and more obvious. I would rather, what Ketu often makes us more aware of is that ultimately, in this world that we experience is perishable. We can cling to that and hold on to it as much as we can, but it will end. Because whatever must end, whatever is born must die as well. But what doesn't die is this energy, the soul within us. It just changed its shape. And very often I have seen in the life of my friends, in the life of people also for whom I was doing readings, that whenever Ketu takes something away from us, he has to up a little bit in this understanding. And sure, in this understanding that, for example, if you lose a person you love, either the person dies, or maybe person leaves you, or there's some other ending happening in the relationship, this may change, it's true, but the love must change. Somebody will come for you to understand that love is a continuous thing. Soul is a continuous thing. And even though this energy that is encompassing us all may constantly change its shapes and forms, but the essence remains the same. And this is why I believe Ketu tries to make us appreciate more this spiritual essence within us. And this is actually really beautifully seen, even if we look into actual deities that are associated with Ketu. And specifically with Ketu, I really wanted to bring this up because it's fascinating. So it is believed that every single Navgraha has some, let's say, deities associated with it. And of course, these deities differ a little bit because it depends on the tradition and how different sages or seers were perceiving that energy to be. So it's very fascinating actually to observe that and try to dive deeper into those meanings. And with Ketu is so fascinating because every graha, each of the 9 planets, has the Adidevata, the main deity that is actually defining its energy. Like sun has Agni or fire as its Adidevata, because of course it's that energy. Agni truly represents the energy of the sun. And in the same way, every graha has also a defining deity. But then when we come to Ketu, it becomes really confusing because the Adidevata of Ketu is Brahman, the formless. So even if we think about it, okay, so if I have a problem with Ketu in my birth chart, so am I supposed to pray to formless Brahman? And how do I even do that, right? Like, how do you actually pray or connect to something that has no form or is not defined by anything? So again, when we think about Ketu and the deity that represents its energy, we feel confused. We don't know what to do with it because we can't put it in a box. We can't just assign a mantra to it. We need to, in a way, just embrace this formless energy and appreciate its existence. And then when we look at Pratyadi Devata, which is like a secondary deity that each graha also has, for Ketu, it's Chitragupta, maybe not so known deity, but quite famous because Chitragupta is known as the scribe of Yamaraj, the god of death. And of course, his task is very, very important because it is believed that Chitragupta writes in his great book every single of our karmas done by word, by deed, but also by thought. All of that is there. But then when we go to the scripture like Vishnu Dharmatara Purana, which actually beautifully describes the deeper meaning of each of those Vedic deities, we see that Vishnu Dharmatara Purana says that Chitragupta actually represents soul itself. It is not an entirely, you could say, separate deity. It's actually part of us because these karmas are recorded inside of us. And this is something that also truly stuck in my mind for quite some time. I remember a couple of years ago, Guruji said in one of his satsangs that in reality, when the soul leaves after it dies, there's no big judgment day. There's no deity out there judging us. We actually judge ourselves. The soul judges itself, looks through all its actions, through all its karma, and regrets and tries to understand what to improve. And Ketu actually is also a very powerful significator of this energy of past memories, past karmas within us. He truly represents also where those past karmas are stored inside of us. But I believe Ketu is to a big extent also a significator of regret. He was actually born, it is believed, from the tears of Mrityu, or goddess of death, goddess of endings. She was crying because her task was to extinct humanity, basically speaking. So there was this regret, there was this resentment, there was this, I don't want to do it, but at the same time, a strong understanding that it must happen, because at this stage in one of the great cycles of time, humanity just grew way too, how to say, corrupt, and even as much as sometimes we believe that it's possible to change, it's possible to improve, to make things better, which is very much a Rahu approach to things, I would say, sometimes it's needed to just turn the page as well and simply open a new chapter. And this is also what Ketu represents. That's why Ketu can be also a very sharp planet, because he is planet of these sharp endings, a very detached planet as well. And actually a very similar story we can see in the story of Avatar associated with Ketu, because each planet has one of the avatars of Lord Vishnu associated with it as well. And for Ketu, it's actually the first avatar, which is in itself quite interesting. It's Matsya avatar, or fish avatar. In itself, a very fascinating choice, because if you think of fish, they are always silent, deep in the water. They are also mute. They actually don't speak. And yet, science shows that they have powerful receptors that can perceive not just the physical vibration around them, but even the electromagnetic fields, in fact. They even use their own electromagnetic field for location, for actually finding the right guidance. And interestingly, Lord Vishnu appeared as Matsya avatar exactly on this, we could say, convergence, or this Sandhi, the meeting of two yugas, when again there was this great story of great deluge that is about to happen, whole earth covered with water. But shortly before that happened, Lord Vishnu firstly appeared as this tiny little fish to King Satyavrata. Small fish. King Satyavrata saved the fish because he took pity on it. He brought the fish in a pot home, and then when he reaches home, the fish already outgrew the pot, basically speaking. So he needs to put the fish into a bigger pot, and then into yet bigger pot, and then into the well, or finally a lake. And then when he ran out of options, he just releases finally this fish back into the ocean, which is fascinating because in the first place, he found this fish in a river. And the fish was crying, please save me from horrible creatures. But now the fish is so huge that he's forced to release this fish back to the ocean. And he's both puzzled and confused as to what this entire Leela of God is right now. But then this Matsya avatar is telling to him and revealing himself as a form of Lord Vishnu, informing him that the great ending, great deluge shall come. But not everything shall be lost. Let's create a big boat, a little bit like Noah's Ark story, store there the Saptarishis so they can preserve the knowledge. Bring there also all the seeds of all the plants so the life can be preserved. Bring also certain animals and come there yourself as well. And I shall guide you throughout the deluge. Of course, the story is much longer and every step of it has a really, really deep meaning. But I think that a really beautiful part of it is, if we look at the story step by step, so Matsya avatar, the incarnation, the fish incarnation of Lord Vishnu, in the beginning of the story truly represents this energy of Ketu, because he is being caught in a pot and he outgrows it all the time. He's dissatisfied with it all the time, actually. He needs a bigger place. And I think that truly the story of Matsya avatar is actually the story of us finding this tiny, silent little voice of our intuition within us, the voice of God, the voice of our soul, which is very, very small in the beginning, and is asking for help because there are so many other, let's say, thoughts and voices in our head that are overlapping it. So we try to preserve it. And I think that symbolic putting of Matsya, avatar of Lord Vishnu in a pot is also somehow, symbolic to us trying to understand actually that and put it into something limited. But this fish constantly outgrows the pot, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until we finally realize, okay, we need to let it out into the ocean, into the infinite. That's the only thing that makes sense. And from tantric perspective also, Matsya avatar of Lord Vishnu is quite fascinating aspect, because Tantra tells us that in our body there live two fish, like the sign of Pisces, two Matsyas. They live in Ida and Pingala, the opposite energy channels in our energy body. And they exist within us in the form of our outgoing and incoming breath as well. But a yogi is supposed to catch them, capture them, and bring them into the Sushumna Nadi, into the central channel. And when that happens, then our life energy can be not only well preserved, but it can also flourish truly, which is fascinating, because when we actually would like to go deeper into the etymology itself of the word Matsya, it wasn't such a common name for fish, actually. Very often the word that was used for fish in general was rather Mina. And Matsya is actually an interesting word, because one way to look at it, one way to look at the Sanskrit part of it, is that mat comes from madhu, which means sweet or blissful. Sya comes from syat, which is flowing. So it's like blissfully flowing all the time, right? Which is something actually truly beautiful to contemplate about, because when I think now about it, that Ketu, this planet which is so much feared, the planet of detachment, the planet of loss, is actually synonymous with this Matsya avatar, whose very name actually reveals the bliss that is just guiding us. Perhaps through that very name itself, we are guided to an understanding that truly when Ketu takes something away from us, maybe he brings us a little closer to this bliss within us as well. And this is something that I personally always found very fascinating. For example, right now I'm doing the Bhagavad Gita course, and it's always funny for me because especially the first few chapters, because Krishna talks there about karma yoga. He describes the qualities of self-realized person. And he's saying there that self-realized person is the one who rises above pleasure and pain, the person who rises above the dualities of victory and failure, who just acts for the sake of acting with detachment. And I think that the most common question that kind of everyone has at this point of the Gita is, so if I am completely detached, if I am equal and neutral to pleasure and pain, does it mean I'm a robot, basically speaking, right? Because we are so used to existing in this constant duality that we are completely unaware to the understanding that there might be something actually higher than that, something more blissful than that, than natural human happiness. And I think that through deeper understanding and digging into the story of Matsya Avatar, we are led to that understanding that actually we can feel something deeper than that. And sometimes I think that the only way to be exposed to these deeper feelings is exactly when we lose something, because we are so vulnerable in a way, but at the same time, we are so often much closer to ourselves, to our true selves. And that's a really beautiful part of the story, because even if we think about Matsya Avatar, he didn't appear to end whole life, actually. He came to preserve it. He came to give a new beginning. And even if you look at it from astrological perspective, ultimately, Ketu rules the first nakshatras after Gandanta, not the last one. He is actually the one who is giving the energy to move forward as well. And sometimes I believe this energy within us can be so easily blocked by something exactly opposite, which is Rahu energy, the overthinking, the attachments, do not allow this vital energy within us to just flow very naturally. And very often, if we would like to go deeper into the symbolism of this Matsya avatar, we know that each planet is somehow connected to one of the chakras within us. With Rahu and Ketu, it becomes a little more interesting because they are not necessarily connected to any of the chakras, but they are rather seen as downward or upward movement, or even more specifically, inward and outward. Ketu is always representing this inward movement within us, like Matsya avatar who just dives deep within. And from this depth of ourselves, he actually brings us true knowledge and true understanding, which is shown through the fight that Matsya avatar had at some point of deluge, at the very bottom of this ocean or covered earth, with a demon who stole the Vedas, the Vedic wisdom, which represents the voice of intuition inside of us. So Ketu is this part of us that allows us to dive deep within and descend from head and very intellectual understanding and try to be more in the body, more be guided through feeling, which is a very interesting contrast, because if we look here, if we try to superimpose the Dashavatar on this slide, we would see that Matsya avatar, he does represent, right? Fish goes in the water, deep in it, and gets a deep knowledge from it. That's the inward movement of Ketu. While when we look at Varaha avatar, he actually elevates the earth, right? He brings things to the surface, which is much more Rahu's quality, we could say. So that in itself kind of really fascinating, I would say, perspective on Dashavatars and what they truly represent inside of us as well. And I found it also somehow really interesting that Tantric tradition mentions so often this idea of these two fish dwelling in our energy body as Ida and Pingala, who eventually need to become one. Because interestingly, we somehow see a very same concept, a very same idea reflected with the story of Mahavidya, the god connected to Ketu. That's also a fascinating aspect of Divine Mother, Chinnamasta. She beheads herself. So this is like the idea of complete sacrifice and letting go of the head, letting go of the ego. So our energy can flow fully and blissfully But she's not just beheading herself or sacrificing herself without a purpose, but even in her story, we see that there are these 3 streams of blood flowing out of her neck. 2 of these streams, they feed 2 of her attendants who were hungry. And they are also supposed to actually represent Ida and Pingala, interestingly. While with the 3rd stream of blood, she feeds herself, which also represents that when we sacrifice something, we do not necessarily lose. We actually can gain more. We can unlock this flow of prana within us. We can make it flow. So in this sense, I found it really interesting that even though those 2 stories of Matsya avatar of Lord Vishnu and Chinnamasta aspect of Divine Mother, they're so vastly different. One is more peaceful, one is a little bit more violent, but essentially their meaning is very similar. And their meaning is to find this inexhaustible source of all life, of all strength, of guidance within us, and to be aware that it's always there. Lord Vishnu also has 4 aspects known as Chaturvyuhas, who represent 4 stages of our consciousness. And the aspect who is specifically connected to Ketu is Sankarshana, the deity who is said to be identical to Anantashesha and also presides over the deep sleep state of our consciousness. And this also I find so interesting in Ketu's context, because I remember how Paramahansa Yogananda said once that when we go to deep sleep state, which is without any dream, it's not that we are just the most peaceful throughout the day, but for a normal, let's say, material person who maybe doesn't reach very deep states in meditation itself or does not meditate at all, this deep sleep state is often when we are closest to God, actually. And this is why this deep sleep is so vital, because our whole body is revitalized in this moment. So even though we appear maybe completely dead in that moment, right? We are completely motionless, seemingly nothing is happening in the outside, but yet we are rejuvenated from within. So there is, I believe, this underlying really strong principle of rejuvenation strongly connected to Ketu. The idea that if we remove something, let go of something, we also unlock the flow of life in our life. And ultimately, I think that this is what Ketu is truly trying to teach us. Even if we would try to look at how normally our journey with Ketu looks like, it always somehow starts with dissatisfaction, not being truly satisfied with how things are, because that's the nature of Ketu, right? Like this little fish for whose pond is never big enough. And very naturally, this dissatisfaction makes us search for something that can actually satisfy us. And ultimately, it leads to liberation, more freedom, more space, rejuvenation. And of course, these 3, like with other planets, we can easily assign them to the 3 gunas of tamas, rajas, and sattva. When Ketu is more tamasic in nature, he is more abundant in this feeling of dissatisfaction. And as a result, some of the symptoms that we may experience can be loneliness, confusion, feeling of isolation as well, even feeling like freezed or paralyzed, unable to move forward. For some people, it may also result in feelings of repulsion or fear, because Ketu also represents those things. If we are faced with the unknown, we will naturally somehow, if we can't understand it, and if we can't accept that we don't understand it, we can easily become afraid of it. And especially when it comes to Ketu, in this context, one thing that really comes to my mind, and I really like to bring this story whenever I talk about Ketu, because I feel it beautifully illustrates the very nature of human psychology. And I'm not sure if I ever said it on any other, let's say, healing of the Navgrahas videos, but I think it's really important to bring it here, because there was this really amazing research, very, very simple one, done some years ago. I really don't remember where exactly, but I believe that whoever is watching it, you can Google it out later. It was very simple. Basically, there was a group of people, and the idea was they were invited to just stand on a table and just jump down from the table. Everything the person did without a problem. These were all very healthy individuals. Then, stage of the experiment, once again, every single person was invited to stand on the table and jump down. Everything was the same, table the same, room the same, nothing different. But there was a difference. The difference was that it was pitch black in the second part of this experiment. So in a way, they knew everything. They knew nothing can happen to them because they did it already. They have their own experience. But it was crazy to see the people who were completely incapable to do that. Just above. As the moment the sensory perception is cut, we just feel paralyzed. We feel like, I don't know that I can do that. And I personally feel that this is often what Ketu actually does to us. We are in the same life circumstances, nothing truly changes sometimes, but just because there's this veil of the unknown on our eyes, we are incapable to do something. And of course, this is what brings us also to the understanding that ultimately Ketu does represent both karmas, but I believe the ancestral as well for a very long time. And how big extent we are influenced by them. Because I think that Ketu ultimately represents primarily our unconscious mind, which in its finest and most beautiful form can give us access to our connection with the divine and access to our intuition. But in its lower tamasic form, it also connects us to the entirety of creation, with all its fears, all its limitations, and all its samskaras that actually keep this world constantly going and keeps us going through constant births and rebirths. Then, of course, when Ketu evolves and becomes Rajasic, then we are more on search. Then Ketu stops paralyzing us or freezing us. He starts being more transformative, and we also start to cooperate with him a little bit. Rajasic Ketu can be also very selective about things and very picky about things as well, which, especially on spiritual path, can be a good thing. Because Ketu will always look for things which are good, which are best, and bring some form of higher purpose. Of course, the shadow side is that Ketu can be very critical as well when he becomes Rajasic. And he can lead to certain emotional swings. Because I believe that when we are faced again with the unknown, with something that we can't fully grasp, it's very natural that we'll try to explain it to ourselves. We will try to rationalize it. And as a result of this rationalization, emotions can come up and they can vary a lot as well. Ketu is for me actually the main karaka for like mixed feelings when we don't really know whether we are happy or sad. It's very hard to somehow describe our state. And of course, in the most Rajasic mode, Ketu will be also very much into trying to like grasp this unknown, intellectualize it, put it into bigger and bigger pot, but still let it be a pot, right? It still wants to anything to hold on to. But when Ketu becomes a little bit more sattvic, he becomes much more about detachment. Sometimes the detachment that comes from Ketu can also be unhealthy detachment. It can sometimes also turn into something like escapism. It can also sometimes turn into just trying to run away from things. Like Arjuna on the battlefield, he said, I won't fight, right? Which is not a good thing because it doesn't come from higher understanding. It comes from immaturity. But when Ketu becomes more refined, as we get to know this energy a little bit better, he starts to develop more healthy detachment and understanding that ultimately we can practice detachment in any life circumstance, in any life situation. It is not conditioned by anything that we experience in the outside. Ketu that becomes a little more refined leads us to more surrender also and acceptance of things. And I think that especially for natives who are at least after their first Saturn return, it can be seen that these areas of their chart, which are somehow impacted by Ketu, they learned more acceptance throughout time. They learn to let go of the things a little bit more. Of course, more refined Ketu will also lead us to hearing the voice of our intuition better, stronger connection with that, stronger connection with the divine and its various aspects. This is why Ketu actually is a planet which is so important and giving us so many blessings on spiritual path, especially. Without Ketu, it's hard, to move on spiritual path, especially if we think that Ketu actually represents the first avatar of Lord Vishnu. And if we think at Dashavatars or 10 incarnations of Lord Vishnu as somehow a metaphor of our own spiritual progress, I think it easily becomes obvious that Ketu becomes a very important initiator of this spiritual path itself, because it all starts from noticing, from this king that actually noticed and heard this very silent voice of this fish and realized, I can do something about it. And that's a beautiful side of it. So when it comes to healing Ketu and uplifting Ketu, I am always very hesitant to gravitate to some very specific solutions, because if we remember that Ketu represents Brahman, the formless aspect of the divine, that Ketu represents the soul within us as well. Obviously, the thing with which Ketu will be pleased the most is just daily meditation or spending some time in silence without any thoughts. One beautiful practice that my Gurudev gave, for example, which is very simple and can be done by anyone, is just to spend 2 minutes in silence every single day and just observe the breath and feel the presence of the divine in your breath. But when you are spending these 2 minutes with your breath, with the divine, make sure that there's no one else. Make sure that you are alone, that there's no one else in your thoughts also, that your thoughts are not running somewhere else. So these 2 minutes can be truly just you and God and nobody else, not even in your thoughts. It's an incredibly simple thing, but it's very powerful. And it can truly help to kind of uplift and satisfy this Ketu, get friends with the unknown, get friends with mystery in our life, and to understand that maybe not everything needs defining or understanding right now. Sometimes what can be helpful also in that process of embracing the mystery, the unknown, the spirit, is contemplating on spiritual truths, like contemplating on Bhagavad Gita, because especially in the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, it's Krishna is trying to take this poor Arjuna out of his depression, out of his complete lack of comprehension of the situation, and he tries to explain him maybe through a little more intellectual approach, but a very straightforward approach also, how things are, and to see them for what they are, and to not try to also grasp things which are beyond our understanding. But of course, if in some charts Ketu is causing some significant damage as well, especially if it somehow manifests on a physical level, because Ketu can bring diseases and illnesses as well, of course, because he represents this karmic influence upon us. And very often this can be chronic as well and stay with us for quite some time. And of course, still meditation and reading the Bhagavad Gita would be the best thing that a person can do. But we can also simply read the story of Matsya Avatar as well. It's a very beautiful story. It's just 1 chapter actually in Srimad Bhagavatam, so it's not very long. But just by understanding the deeper metaphoric meaning of that story, our mind automatically will go to a little bit different state. And this particular mantra to Lord Matsya, to Lord Vishnu in that particular form is also a very powerful one. It's a 12-syllable mantra, which also resonates with this liberating energy of Ketu. Om Namo Bhagavate Mahamatsyaya, the great fish, because he appeared in this form of gigantic fish. Especially as we meditate on this mantra and again focus on our breath, on this prana within us, which is by its very definition indestructible, and it's taking its source from the divine, from the soul, which is limitless. I am quite convinced that this can help a native to bring the body itself also to a better state when it needs it, especially when we need more energy, when we need more strength and power. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Matsya avatar of Lord Vishnu is also praised as giver of mental and physical strength. So whenever we feel that we are lacking it, that something is obstructing us from within, also contemplating on this story and on this mantra can help us to let go a little bit and let this energy flow through us more freely. So these are very simple things that we can do, but as I said, I personally gravitate the most to the solution number 3 on this slide, which is just daily meditation and spending some time in silence. Because from that, I believe we can gain the biggest insight. So that's all from me. I would like to hear from you, Dr. Paiji. What would you like to tell us about Ketu?
No, I think, Achala, I was completely immersed in this discussion with such a beautiful way that you brought in the glories and mysteries of Ketu. And what a great time to speak about it, to absorb this energy when there is a lunar eclipse that is happening as we are speaking. And as I was thinking about Ketu, every time you start, going back and learning about these Navgrahas, there is more insights that, they come and fascinate you with. Now, one of the themes that I kind of understood when I started studying, the way I looked at these nodes, and I would usually use this also to teach people, the way I understood these nodes is like a convex mirror and a concave mirror. Now, if you see a concave mirror is one, if you go nearer to the concave mirror, the images can be, large, and they could be really looking bigger than what it is actually. Okay, so usually these are to show certain things larger. So that is more like a Rahu thing where you're seeing things which is not real, but they're looking more virtual and they're looking bigger. And a convex mirror is what you would see, where you would see also, things to be a little bit extended and stretched. And these are usually, you would see convex mirrors to be put at corners where there can be accidents, to eliminate blind spots, to prevent collisions, and corners and intersections of aisles and places where, you can probably not know somebody coming walking, but you can't see from the other aisle somebody's coming at a crossroad or a junction, or even at a traffic light where you have to take a deep turn and you do not know there is another vehicle that may be approaching from that side. So I feel, and even this, when you see all corners, wherever areas which are corners is where Ketu's energies are very strong. Any intersection points where there are 4 roads meeting, there is Rahu, but wherever you are seeing a blind spot, you cannot, understand that is Ketu's energy. And that's why in Nadi astrology, they claim that Ketu governs all places which are corners of the houses, staircases and under the staircases, and things where the energies are stronger. So that is one thing that I wanted to say. The other thing with Ketu, as you mentioned, all the Ketu's associated nakshatras in Vimshotri, they would all start at the Gandanta points. That means there is a lot of transformation energy or a transformation thing that is happening. And if you really look at it, if you look at where Ashwini Nakshatra falls in Mesha Rashi, and then you have Magha Nakshatra which falls in Simha Rashi, and then you have Mool Nakshatra which falls in Dhanur Rashi. So the one thing that I also see the connection where Ketu is the bridging force which brings together is, if you look at Sagittarius, Dhanur Rashi is the Mool Trikona of Jupiter, who is called as the Jiva Karaka. And then you see, Mesha, which is Aries, which is the Mool Trikona of Mars, which is called as Deha Karaka. And then you go to Simha Rashi, which is Leo, the sign of Leo, where you say it is the sun and the Mool Trikona, the head office of sun, which is called as Atma Karaka. So if you see, Ketu brings the unification of the Jiva, Deha, and Atma. Whenever all of these three are coming together is when a birth can happen, which is what we call in Jyotish Shastra as Lagna. See, the word Lagna and ascendant essentially means the same because it is the degree or the star that was rising on the eastern horizon as you are born. But there is a very subtle difference that you need to understand when we are talking about Lagna. Lagna means unification or union, or Lagna means joining or something. So unless all of these three join together, that's when the birth happens. What is it? You need to have a body, Sharira, then you need to have the Jiva, which is the Prana Shakti coming, and there has to be an Atma. All of their unification creates that. And I feel that Ketu is the one that brings them together. And Ketu brings them based on your past karmas that are there. And that is why, usually wherever Ketu sits, you say these are past experiences the body is going to bring in. The other theme also what I want to say is that I saw is what you brought about the influence of Chitragupta being the Pratyari Devata. Now Brahman, the supreme consciousness or the supreme deity that you say who has no form, which is, we can probably say he's Nirguna, which means he has no attributes, is the Brahman, the supreme consciousness which is having no attributes. And you have Chitragupta. When I started studying Ketu, I also observed that every Navgraha is associated with a Shakti, which means that which gives them the ability to manifest the unmanifested. So without the Shakti, which is the female consort, they are incomplete because they are not able to deliver on what their attributes are, characteristics are, their karakas are, their significations are, without the support of the Shakti. Because even if you look at Purusha and Prakriti, which is Shiva and Shakta, or Shakti and Shakta, which is Shiva and Parvati. When these union, the polarities come, that is when the real manifestation does happen. So when I was teaching this, I saw the consort of Ketu is called as Chitralekha. That's his consort. That is his Shakti. Now Chitralekha is a deity who is the goddess of paintings, art, sketching. Chitra means beautiful pictures. And she greatly worships Shiva and Parvati. Okay. And you see the Pratyari Devata is Chitragupta. Gupta means secret images. Somebody who is capturing images secretly. We live in a world today where you have multiple cameras wherever you go, on the streets, everywhere. We live in a camera nation. Wherever we go, we can't hide from the government. The government is tracking us everywhere, we are going, because there are millions of cameras set up everywhere. So we are kind of living in a world which is like Chitragupta is recording you and seeing you all the time. And he is capturing this secretly. So Chitragupta and Chitralekha is the beautiful, who draws. So somewhere I feel it leaves impressions. Ketu is the place where we leave impressions, and we leave, even Ketu can give you like a photographic memory that you remember things. And this is where I feel Ketu, because you're talking about the transition that is happening at the Gandanta zone, and Ketu being the first nakshatra which it rules whenever it starts. Those people who have very strong Ketus can be very intuitive and even past oriented. I've seen some people who can remember images of the past very clearly. Sometimes even you have seen certain prodigies and geniuses who have even remembered their past lives as well after their birth. So who gives you this photographic memory that is there, that is Ketu gives you? Because otherwise Ketu has to wipe it off for you. Otherwise you will not remember how many lifetimes you have come, what are your past. Because it is fascinating, there are so many instances where a young girl child who was born in India, I remember it became very popular in 20, 30 years ago. She remembered even where her last lifetime was. They actually were surprised. She took, and she also recollected the house. She also recollected her husband. She knew the name of the husband, but she would not call, in India, you would never call the husband by their name. And she would also remember she had a child. So there were so many memories that can be there, which can be created by Ketu. Now, one more thing with Ketu, what I feel is Ketu was also associated very strongly with the astronomical observations that were happening during those times. And that is why you see there are comets. When comets were seen, there would be certain instances that are happening here on the Earth plane. They would record those. And then those comets, like you have Halley's Comet, which always comes at particular time events. And then you have what we call as Dhumra Ketu. Dhumra means the long tail of trail that the comets leave as they pass through the atmosphere, and we can see them sometimes with visible eyes, or with the, you see shooting stars, falling stars. You say, make a wish, make a wish. So somewhere Ketu is all of this, I feel, because it is all about making a wish of what you want to manifest. This is one thing.
And I think that as you are mentioning that, Dr. Paiji, it really comes to my mind that Ketu is, due to that, also so associated with generally with nimitas, with mystery, because I think that this is again such a human thing of all of us to do, right? We see something that we don't fully understand, like there's a comet flying on the sky. I have no idea what it means, so let me assign a meaning to it.
Exactly. Yeah. There is a falling star, we say a shooting star, you see a comet. We see any phenomenon that you see today. A lot of people have really been taken to social media to post about certain flying saucers, objects, UFOs, unidentified flying saucers. That's becoming more and more. That is Ketu. Ketu is those saucers that you see that you can't put an explanation. What is that which is flying, or whatever looks like what is flying, and you cannot explain the phenomenon the way that they are. That's all Ketu, because mysticism, mystery is Ketu. Then in astrology, Ketu is often in many people considered as the story of Mahamatsya. You talked about Matsya avatar, which is the fish avatar and the first avatar. So somewhere they also connect Ketu with the Kula Unnati. Kula Unnati means, or Kula Shreshta, which means somebody who's born in the family who can have the potential to take the family lineage forward is connected to Ketu. Okay, Kula Shreshta also means somebody who's going to be very prominent and will bring name and recognition to the family. And that is why we see Ketu is always observed to be given the name of a flag or a dvaja. Dvaja means we leave an impression behind. And I have seen people who have very strong Ketu's influence, even though we say Ketu is a liberator. I feel Ketu being a Chaya Graha, he would probably not liberate you, but he will put you in the marga of liberation, which means moksha marga. He's the one who will show you the direction in which you want to probably go. See, everybody has different paths that you can take. Today we know that we have Raja Yoga or Raja Marg, and there is Bhakti Yoga or Bhakti Marg, then there is Jnana Yoga or knowledge, Jnana Marg, and then there is Karma Yoga, or which path you want to take to reach to the final destination. Is it Bhakti? Is it Jnana? Is it Karma? Or is it Raja? So these are the four paths that have been discussed. And Ketu,
and it's so beautiful, like what you are saying, Dr. Paiji, because then when we look at Ketu from this perspective, that he's not necessarily the liberator, but he's a Chayagraha who leads us to liberation. But again, why? And then if we read in one of the chapters of the Gita, Lord Krishna says that there are 4 types of people who actually search for him, who search for God. But what is the first type? The distressed. Right, the ones who are distressed. It's true. That's why I believe Ketu is such a prominent planet to lead us on the path towards liberation, on the path towards God, because either he makes us distressed or he makes us seekers for knowledge. The ones who look for knowledge because we see something, we don't understand it, but we want to understand it. And I think that these are like the two most common ways how we even go into the spiritual path.
Yes. And I've seen many people who take up spiritual path in deep pain and sufferings.
Yes.
You are happy and you're following Raja Marg, which means everything is coming to you. You're leaving the materialistic world. You would have not wanting to choose a path amongst whether it's karma, it's bhakti, jnana. So I think it puts you and forces you, if you're trying to resist, puts you on that path. That is the other thing that I wanted to say. And that is why Ketu has Graha has the ability to give you unconditional surrender, which means there is no conditions attached when you want to surrender to Lord Almighty. All other Grahas, when their influence is there, you would put a condition. Okay, I want to get married and then I would go towards God realization. I want to get children, then I will go. Once I have a own house, then I will, relieve and I will relinquish. But there is a lot of free will that we have, but Ketu gives you very limited opportunity to apply your free will and your karmas. He gives you radicalization, like Rahu does radicalization. Ketu is bringing you transformation and change, whether you like it or you don't like it. So Ketu in that way is very
Ketu is a little bit more like an aspect of time itself, even more than Rahu, I believe, because it's actually really beautiful. Even Bhagavatam says that the influence of God we can feel in 2 ways in material world, and we can feel it either as the super soul within, which is also kind of Ketu inside of us, or as time around us, so we can feel God externally and internally. But why as time? Because I believe that's one factor in regards to which we all feel equally helpless. We understand that there's no other thing that makes sense to do other than surrender.
Yes.
And it truly humbles us, and it truly makes us also, at the same time, I think, appreciate the life itself. And this is something that Guruji said really beautifully. He said that all the saints, like no matter which tradition you take, they had one thing in common. They made death their friend. They realized that every moment can be the last. And with that awareness being in their mind, they were not wasting their breath even just like that. But in every breath they took, they remembered God.
And I think that is what Ketu brings into your life, as you have said, Achalaji. He brings some element of separation. He brings decisiveness, and that's what you're talking about, being in silence. And yesterday night, just before sleeping, I always read, something about, like a Quran, or read about some great saint. That is my habit from time. Yesterday, I happened to be reading about Sant Goswami Tulsidas, the 16th century poet who wrote about Ramcharit Manas. And, the beautiful story there was what I wanted to say is he was a renunciate. And what is very surprising that I didn't know, and I was, reading about it, is Sant Goswami Tulsidas in the 16th century. He started remembering what his guru had told him, the Ramayana, which had an influence of Valmiki Ramayana, but he has his own impressions that he had, and he started writing that in when he was 77 years old. And he wrote this he took to write all the entire thing, the 7 chapters that are there. He started writing them. And it took it 2 years and 6 months and 26 days, which is what is said. That's what he took to write the entire thing. Now, the beautiful thing is he was guided by the higher forces of Hanumanji, who met him, personally. Now, when after meeting Hanumanji, he wanted to have the darshan of Lord Sri Ram. So he requests Hanuman to show him Lord Sri Ram. So Hanuman says, okay, I will give you darshan of Lord Sri Ram. Go to Chitrakoot, and there you will find Lord Sri Ram. Now, on that fateful day when Hanuman had told him that you will be able to see Lord Sri Ram, he was doing his duties. He was narrating Ramayana, and he was, that is his usual thing. He keeps chanting the name of God, and he starts telling everybody about Ramayana and the glories of Ramayana and things. As he was narrating, and with other people, he's doing his errands, there were 2 youthful people sitting on horses. They come riding, and they don't look that they were from that day and age in the 16th century. They look very youthful. They were riding the horses. They come and they go in front of him, and they pass through him, and he doesn't realize it is them. Okay, he observes them, but he doesn't realize that it is them. So he goes to Hanumanji and he said, you said I would be able to get darshan of Ram. So Hanuman says, you have already got the darshan of Ram. He said, where? He said, the 2 people that came riding were Ram and Lakshman. They were actually them. He started crying inconsolably. He said, you should have given me a hint they were coming. I would have at least watched them with my eyes full, because I was so busy in narrating the Ramayana. I saw them for a fraction of a second, but I didn't take the attention, didn't go there. So I'm very, very dissatisfied. He starts crying and wailing and sobbing. Like Hanuman says, don't worry, I'll give you another chance. And that day, when he said, I'll give you another chance to see Ram will come again to you, I'll give you this time. He says that day was Mauni Amavasya. It's about keeping silence. Mauni Amavasya, you have to be silent. So, on the banks of a river, he is distributing sandalwood paste to everybody who is coming there in name of Prabhu. And he's chanting the name, and he is giving sandalwood paste. Say, put the tilak. Then on that day, there is a young man walks up to him and says, hey priest, can you have a little bit of tilak? And again, that was Lord Sri Ram who came to him, and he would have lost the chance, because he's so engrossed in his own mantras and things that thinking that he'll meet, but he doesn't know how to recognize him. So Ram came asking for the sandalwood paste to draw a tilak. And Hanuman knows, if I let him go from this opportunity, again, he will create a ruckus and create a chaos, saying that you didn't tell me. So Hanuman becomes like a small bee or a fly. He comes to the ear and he says a shloka, saying in a very cryptic manner, saying that the person who is asking you for the tilak, the sandalwood paste itself, is Lord Sri Ram. But he doesn't give it directly. And the man asks him, and he's looking at him, and when he hears that, he understands this is Lord Sri Ram. And that was his darshan of Sri Ram, that he says. So why I'm saying is Mauni, you were talking about keeping silence. Sometimes if you really want to see Lord, maybe there is every day you can see Lord coming and giving you darshans, but we do not understand there is Lords and gods are walking with us in today's times, because we are so engrossed And we have certain definitions that Lord will come only with a crown, golden chariot, or something. All of this, but we might probably find them walking with us.
This is actually beautiful what you're sharing, Dr. Paiji, because that's something that we can see in story of so many saints. Also, the Namdev Maharaj from Maharashtra had a very similar story when Vital came to him also in many times in a disguised way, but in like very, how to say, like in a very ugly way, like somebody very old or sick or like outcast and something like that. So actually it would be very hard to recognize. But I think that in this story which you shared, Dr. Paiji, and also in the story of Namdev Maharaj, and actually I think that in the story of truly every saint or devotee, that the crucial role was this advice from the guru that came, right? Because how can we see, how can we recognize? The guru already is there, the guru already saw and has this divine vision which we are still lacking, can see beyond this veil of material reality, which I believe Ketu can also grant us. But even if we look at Ketu, it's so interesting that sometimes it's believed that his Mula Trikona is actually in Pisces, which is Jupiter's sign, and paradoxically enough called Meena Rashi, right? The fish once again. And this is where whenever Jupiter and Ketu also come together in a birth chart, I always find it to be such a beautiful combination, truly, because there will be some deeper guidance also coming in the form of the guru that will lead us in the right direction, like give us, show us things a little differently. Like I remember when I was reading Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita in the past, first time when I read Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, I was, I think, 16 or 17, and I liked it. I liked the direct, literal meaning of it. But I could not really go that much, into the, let's say, metaphysical or deeper meaning of it and the meaning of its characters. But then when for the first time I read the Bhagavad Gita with the commentary of my Gurudev, I was like, wow, it's actually amazing. It's actually really amazing. When you read into that and dive into that, it's so beautiful. And for example, now we are now having this ongoing Bhagavad Gita course, which is, by the way, whoever wants to participate, who's watching this video, you are most welcome, because it's completely free. It's like donation basis, and all donations go to ashram. So everyone is most welcome to participate at any point. But what I also found that is interesting for people, that when there is this,
I'll give you and tell all the audience, I will leave a link below in today's description, so that if anybody wants to, join the courses.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, continue.
Yeah, this one is really nice, and I would really recommend it to everyone, because it's really special how my Gurudev, put all this knowledge together in such a simple and accessible way. And I think that this is why I also wrote Bhagavad Gita as an interesting point also for uplifting our Ketu, because I think that the big problem that we have with Ketu as humans in general, we don't understand truly. And we don't understand him, we don't understand this energy. But Lord Krishna actually puts it so beautifully in words, and he actually even reassures a couple of times Arjuna by telling him quite frankly and openly, look, some things are simply beyond your understanding. You can cry about it, you can lament about it, but it will not change that. So he makes this very clear distinction about things which should be known and are about to be known, and things that should remain a mystery also. And this is where is the opportunity for all of us to actually practice surrender to the divine, which is ultimately what all saints needed to experience, the actual surrender. And like you mentioned, Dr. Paiji, that this can happen so much more easily in actual silence.
Yeah.
Because it's true, our mind functions differently if we do one day or even few days in silence. It's amazing how mind changes.
No, I completely agree with you on the silence, a bit of it, and contemplating, and just having the name of God, because Ketu is all about months. See, I was also tell you a story about one of my clients who was talking to me about the glories of wanting to be in Vrindavan and going around the mountain, chanting the names. There are so many saints that we meet. And
absolutely, yes.
so the going around the mountain, why I said this is, if you look at mountains, we call Ketu as the Shiki. Shiki means the mountain peak that you see is called as Shiki as well. See, Shiki is another name for a peacock as well. So somewhere I feel Ketu has the energy of the higher consciousness of Lord Ganapati and Lord Skanda. Because Skanda sits and mounts on a peacock. And peacock is also, very colorful, the feathers. And even Krishna used to keep the feather of a peacock on his. It's very protective. It creates a kind of a shield. I'm not anywhere suggesting that you should keep that, because it's our India's national bird, and it is people should avoid trying to get into all of this. But I just want to say the significance. So somewhere I feel this is the highest piece. You go to the southern part of India, there is also a mountain where there is an Agni Lingam, which is called as Arunachala, and people Girivalam, they go and circumambulate that. If you see, even when you see the greatest temples that you see, even in India, Tirupati, that is based on 7 hills. So, you see the 7 hills, then you have to go through the 6 hills and then do the 7th hill, which is called the Venkatadri, to actually meet. And it all, so somewhere I feel when you say, like, even in Jyotish Shastra, we say, Kujavat Ketu and Shanivat Rahu, which means, Ketu is very similar to Mars, and Rahu is very similar to Saturn. So if you really understand, then you see what it means is Mars is like Skanda and Ketu is like Ganesha. They are both the suns. But if you really know that both have very unusual birth, they are not born from the yoni of their mother. They were created, if you see, they were kind of, even with Ganesha's birth, he was created from the turmeric and the dirt which came from, and she crafted him. And the story of Kartikeya looks like it was probably the first experiment of a test tube baby, because if you see, there was Agni who took the ball of fire, which was created by the Shakti of Shiva. Then it was Vayu who brought it. Then there was river Ganga, and so if you see, there is fire involved. Vayu is air. Then there is water, Ganga, and then you see there is the reeds, which is called the forest of reeds. Sara Vana, and then we have the 6 kritikas, the mothers who. So if you really look at it, it looks like an incubator. Today's incubator facilities has to have these conditions. Like you are in the womb. So people who are born, early birth, they are kept in incubators. And the incubators have these conditions to maintain. So somewhere it's a story, it talks about incubation. That's what I'm saying. Childbirth and Ketu signifies something which will take you ahead in your life. And finally, I think, there is so much we can talk about. But one more thing I wanted to say about thing is, whenever you do your japa, which means whenever you're doing your sadhana and you have the japamala or akshamala, whatever you call, the rosary beads that you have. So you have 108 beads. And then you hit one bead, which is called the Sumeru, the Mount Meru. Okay. So whenever you hit that bead, you actually don't cross that. You actually rotate your japmala or your rosary beads, and you start doing your jap again with. So this again is the Ketu. Ketu you can never cross. That's why it is called the Gandanta. Wherever Ketu and Mercury are sitting, that's the point where is the Gandanta, because you cannot cross the Mount Meru. So Ketu has very great significance, I think. And Ketu, if you have a very strong Ketu's presence in your chart, your legacy will still remain here even after you're gone, and many, many hundreds of years after you're gone, you will still be remembered, you will still be talked about. So it is like you have to have a great, Ketu in your chart if you want to be recognized, remembered. And so some people's, Ketu is strong. They might have left their earth plane, but they will be remembered for many, many generations to come. So Ketu is a generational planet which will not let your glories to die. No other planet will give you that much. And that's why I want to end this with the shloka by Vedavyas Rishi, which is very, very important. Phalasha Pushpa Sankasham, Taraka Grahamastakam, Raudham Raudratmakam Ghoram, Tam Ketum Pranamamyaham, which means Phalasha Pushpa, he is as red as the flame of the forest, the flowers of the, the tree, which is flame of the forest. Then the next thing he says, Vedavyas Rishi in the Stotra, Taraka Grahamastakam, which means he's the head of all the stars and the Navgrahas as well. So that's why wherever Ketu stands, from there all the Navgrahas begin. And if you look at his calculations, in many times when you look at even the Kal, calculations of Kal, every day, 1.5 hours is one Kal. Ketu is not considered in that. Rahu is considered, but Ketu is not considered. So Ketu is above time, above all of this, and he's the head of all the grahas and the taras as well, stars, constellations. Raudhram Raudratmakam Ghoram, which means he is as energetic, fearful as Rudra himself. So he's kind of a Rudra avatar, is what I feel, Ketu. So Raudhram Raudratmakam Ghoram, which means he's a Ghora as Rudra. So we, with this, I want to end. Whatever you can share any more points, but I feel Ketu brings in a lot of people. Even Parashar Rishi also says he brings in a lot of mixed races, which means there is mixed race, which is not, there is no purity there. He's ready to integrate with many people if it is going to create a very stronger race. So that means which is very deficient, which has very low genetically transmitted disorders, Ketu can create, but he also has the ability to remove genetically transmitted ailments that can come, which we usually call as Nadi dosha. When there is Nadi dosha that can create, the same Nadis can create so Ketu has the ability to create stronger races, and that's why it's connected to mixed caste or mixed race.
And this is, I believe, comes from the fact that Ketu is always, in a way, trying to kind of make us forget about this external shape of things, always external forms, and go beyond that, transcend that, and see the underlying spirit that actually connects us all. And that's, I think, truly the beauty of Ketu and what Ketu signifies and what Ketu represents. We even say that Ketu is the foreigner, right? But what does it mean that Ketu is the foreigner? He is the actual ultimate foreigner, the unknown, who happens to be the greatest friend, right? Like we are saying about God, Krishna himself says, he is the closest and yet the most far. He's the closest because he's within us, but he's the most far because he is always beyond the understanding of our mind, and yet remained our greatest friend. And these are really beautiful points, what you were mentioning, Dr. Paiji, even in context, of story of Matsya Avatar, where does he take the boat of King Satyavrata during the Great Deluge? Is in the Himalayas as well. So they can wade through there on the peak, which somehow symbolically represents also going to this, because what are the Himalayas, the mountains? The mountain is inside of us. It's on the top, right? It's taking us to a higher consciousness, which I think on a practical level translates into like when you are going through ending in life, something suddenly finished, somebody died, there's something traumatizing, great and unknown, and you don't know how to deal with it. Rather than depending on your own personal effort, just withdraw for a moment, bring your awareness up and connect with the divine, depend on something actually higher than you, right? And this is, I think, why we as society, especially in this day and age, we struggle with Ketu. We don't like to feel helpless. We don't like to surrender. Yeah. But sometimes when we actually just agree to that and just accept that, we can feel so relieved that we don't need to actually do everything ourselves always. We don't need to always do everything alone and independently. We can depend on higher power as well.
No, that is beautiful that you say that. And then, also, Ketu can also be connected to what we call as, if you see in India, when you become a Brahmin, you hold a small tuft of hair is here. and they tie it and they put the Ketu is that which is holding you is the point here where you have, they leave a tuft of hair here, if you see, they tie it and they put a flower there, you're touching the feet of your highest form. Okay, and the thing I wanted to say that if you really understand Ketu, as we said, is the flag. Now, this is one thing that unites a culture, a community, a group of people, a tribe. Because if you look at every nation feels pride with the whole national flag, and you can see even the politicians, which is represented by the sun, the military, the police, the common man, everybody stands up and salutes the flag, which means the sun, Mars, Saturn, the common man. All of them are looking towards the flag and we are saluting the flag. And that gives us the patriotism, that also gives us a sense that we belong to a particular tribe, community, or nation. So I think flags have a great way of binding things, even though it is a separative, but with that just one national identity, identity that we create for ourselves is Ketu.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, a great proof that a symbol is powerful. Yes. And also Ketu represents the power of symbols. I heard a couple of times these questions that I think very naturally arise, especially in Western mind, is like, why all these Puranas, they always speak on things in a very symbolic way, metaphoric way, like why can't they just deliver the message very simply and easily? And I think that's one and obvious explanation here is that every story is so multidimensional, actually, and you can deliver so much more meaning through actually symbol rather just delivering truth directly. But I also think there's one more factor here. And it is that unfortunately with time, as of course time passes, we just forget things very easily. But stories delivered as symbols, they will be remembered. They will leave a permanent imprint in our awareness. And this is again the Ketu, the memory. How do we remember things? Through picture, through symbol. This is something that really will stay in our awareness, and this is what will be maintained throughout generations to come much more easily without twisting it, without adding our own interpretations to it. We can just maintain the story the way it is. And interpretation shall come on its own.
No, I think, this Ketu also, as you are talking about the symbology, this is how I the symbology, not that I see, if you know, the symbol of Ketu is like a pot which is Amrit, which is opened up and it's ready. And if you look at Rahu, it is facing down, which means the Amrit, you're not getting anything. It's like a cup which is, facing down, and the cup which is facing up. So in some way, I feel Ketu also has a connection with the lineage, carrying of your lineage, which means it's the cup which is holding the portion. What is that word in English which is called in the Bible? They say, the cup where Jesus's blood lineage is there. What do you call that? You know what I mean?
The Holy Grail. The Holy Grail.
The Holy
yeah.
Ketu is the Holy Grail, which means your ancestors from your great grandparents who have carried, and all of that Holy Grail is there in your genes. Your genes are carrying the seeds and the karmic vibrations of your ancestors. And Ketu is that karmic vibrations, the Holy Grail that you are carrying with you. The blood and the lineage of your ancestors.
That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yeah. Because Ketu truly is that. He's the one who carries it farther. And I think that this is also like one thing that is sometimes so misinterpreted about Ketu, that he is the one who ends things. He doesn't really end things, because even like Krishna says in the Gita, that what is real cannot truly die, and that what is unreal was never truly existing anyways. So Ketu is just making things change their shape and move forward and be carried farther. but they never truly die.
And that's why I feel, in even the gene therapy, gene theory, that we say, if you're born as a female, you must have received from your mother's chromosomes, because that is X and Y chromosomes.
Yeah.
Ketu is the father's chromosome, I feel, the X and Y chromosome, whatever you're saying, you get one extra or something like that, and that's how we are born as a male or a female.
Yes.
So the male thing which is coming is Ketu, is what I feel, genetic code that we Ketu brings in that. And that is
Absolutely.
why or Kula Prapti and Kula Shreshta, which means the lineage of the Holy Grail, which is being carried for generations together. That's how your family tree keeps growing, is what I feel, that Ketu gives you that signification. Anyway, but this was a great discussion, Achala ji. It was, there are so many things that have come up, and I hope the audiences appreciate all that that you took, your precious time to come. I know we've been trying to do this for a very, very long time, but
yes,
finally we thought, okay, this is an eclipse day, and probably it all suits us better to do it today.
Yeah.
So,
yes, thank you so much also, Dr. Paiji. I'm very happy again to discuss those topics with you, because I always believe that, especially when we discuss about those things, it's like we connect, to this Ketu's energy of the unconscious mind, and inspiration flows, simply speaking. So it's very beautiful always. Thank you so much.
thank you very much. And we'll see you back again very soon. Thank you. Namaste.
Yes, I hope so. Thank you, Dr. Paiji. Namaste.
Namaste.